The first sound that echoed through the courtroom wasn't the judge's gavel. It was the sharp crack of a wooden fence post hitting the polished floor. Someone had carried one of the HOAs, freshly painted, private property, resident access $25 per day signs into evidence, and when my attorney pulled it apart in front of everyone, the entire courtroom fell silent. The board president, Diane Holloway, looked like she'd stopped breathing. For nearly 2 years, she'd told everyone that Willow Creek belonged to the Homeowners Association. She'd fenced it off, hired private security, and even charged families to fish, kayak, or simply walk along the water their own backyards had overlooked for decades. Now 12 jurors, a county judge, reporters, and nearly every resident from our neighborhood were staring at a century-old document projected across a massive courtroom screen. I could hear whispers spreading behind me. That's impossible. They knew. No way they actually forged those maps. Diane suddenly pushed her chair backward. Your Honor, she interrupted, her voice trembling, this document shouldn't even be admissible. The judge didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly adjusted his glasses and studied the faded survey dated 1919. My attorney calmly walked toward the witness stand. Would you please read the highlighted paragraph out loud? The county surveyor swallowed hard before reading. The natural watercourse known as Willow Creek shall remain permanently attached to Parcel 27 and its successors. Any obstruction, diversion, restriction of public easement, or commercial use without county authorization shall be considered unlawful. The room exploded. People gasped. Someone near the back actually applauded before the bailiff ordered silence. Diane's attorney buried his face in both hands. Across the aisle, I watched the confidence drain from every HOA board member who had laughed at me during meetings, ignored my letters, and threatened to fine me into bankruptcy for cutting their illegal fence. But then the judge leaned forward. There is one question, he said quietly. The courtroom became so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. If this survey has existed for more than 100 years, he looked directly at Diane. Who authorized the county records that erased it 5 years ago? Every face in the courtroom turned toward the defense table. No one spoke, not even Diane. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 46 years old, and for most of my life, I've believed that land isn't something you truly own. It's something you're trusted to protect until the next generation takes over. That's exactly how my father raised me. Our home sat on the eastern edge of Cedar Ridge, a quiet neighborhood just outside Asheville, North Carolina. While most people bought their houses because of the mountain views or the peaceful streets, my family had been there long before Cedar Ridge even existed. My grandfather purchased the property shortly after returning from World War II, when the land was little more than rolling pasture bordered by a winding creek called Willow Creek. That creek wasn't just scenery. It was where my father taught me how to cast a fishing line without startling the trout. It was where my daughter Emma skipped her first stone across the water. Every 4th of July, neighbors gathered along its banks with folding chairs, coolers, and kids chasing lightning bugs until the stars filled the sky. Nobody ever questioned who could use it because, for as long as anyone remembered, the creek had always belonged to the community in spirit, while the water rights remained tied to our property. I worked as a civil engineer, which probably explains why I paid attention to details most people ignored. I wasn't argumentative by nature. My wife, Rachel, liked to joke that I'd spend 3 hours reading an instruction manual before assembling a lawn chair. I preferred facts over assumptions and conversations over confrontations. Life in Cedar Ridge had always been predictable. Saturday mornings meant coffee on the back deck while watching deer cross the opposite bank. Sunday afternoons usually ended with neighbors wandering over to chat while our golden retriever splashed through the shallow water. We weren't wealthy, but we had something that felt more valuable: peace. That peace began changing the day a new HOA board was elected. At first, the changes seemed harmless: fresh landscaping at the entrance, new mailbox standards, parking regulations that most people shrugged off. Diane Holloway, the newly elected HOA president, constantly talked about modernizing the neighborhood and unlocking hidden community assets. I didn't think much about those words until one Monday morning. I walked outside carrying my coffee and froze. Bright orange survey stakes had been driven into the ground along both sides of Willow Creek. By lunchtime, workers in reflective vests were measuring the shoreline. When I asked one of them what they were doing, he glanced at his clipboard before answering. Building the new boundary fence. I stared at him. What boundary fence? He looked confused. The HOA's creek project. No one had ever mentioned a creek project. As I stood there watching another truck unload stacks of pressure-treated fence posts, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. For the first time since my grandfather bought this land, Willow Creek looked like it belonged to someone else. The next morning, I drove straight to the HOA clubhouse before work. A half-dozen contractors' trucks were already parked outside. Through the conference room windows, I could see rolled-up blueprints spread across a long table, while Diane Holloway stood at the front, confidently pointing to different sections with a laser pointer. I knocked once and stepped inside. The conversation stopped. Diane smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile she'd worn during neighborhood cookouts. It was polished, calculated, the kind of smile that made you feel like the meeting had been interrupted by someone who wasn't invited. "Ethan," she said, "this is a board meeting. I won't take long." I glanced at the blueprints. They showed a continuous black line running alongside Willow Creek. A fence, a gate, a ticket booth. What exactly is this? Diane folded her hands together. The Willow Creek Recreation Project. I've lived beside that creek my entire life. Nobody voted on this. She tilted her head slightly. The board approved it unanimously. The board doesn't own the creek. Several members exchanged nervous looks. One of them, Greg Sanders, cleared his throat. "The association owns the common amenities." "That isn't a common amenity," I replied. "That water borders my property." Diane's smile disappeared. "According to our legal documents, you're mistaken." She slid a glossy packet across the table. Inside was a newly printed neighborhood map. The creek had been shaded entirely inside HOA property. I looked back up. "This map isn't right. It came from county records. I've seen the county plats. They don't look like this." Her voice hardened. "Then perhaps your memory is outdated." The contractors quietly gathered their papers and left the room, sensing the tension. As soon as the door closed, Diane leaned closer. "We're investing over $400,000 into improving this neighborhood. By fencing off a creek? By creating a premium recreational area. For whom?" She answered without hesitation. "For residents who purchase annual access passes." I actually laughed. "You want homeowners to pay to walk beside water they've enjoyed for decades. It's called maintaining quality." "No," I said evenly, "it's called charging people for something you don't own." The room went silent. Diane's eyes narrowed. "You should be careful before making accusations. I'm asking questions, and I'm giving answers." I left before the conversation turned into an argument, but by the weekend the first section of black steel fencing had already gone up. Heavy gates blocked the walking trail, and bright signs announced, "Private HOA waterfront. Authorized access only." Neighbors gathered outside the fence, stunned. Children pressed their hands against the bars, asking their parents why they couldn't reach the creek anymore. Then the invoices arrived. Every household received a notice explaining that creek access now required a yearly membership fee, with additional daily passes available for guests. The neighborhood erupted. People blamed Diane. Others blamed me for causing trouble after word spread that I'd challenged the project. 3 days later, there was a knock at my front door. 2 sheriff's deputies stood on my porch. One of them held a complaint in his hand. "Mr. Brooks," he said politely, "the Homeowners Association has reported that you've threatened board members and attempted to interfere with private property improvements." I stared at him in disbelief. I did no such thing. The deputy studied my face for a moment before lowering the paperwork slightly. "That's not the only allegation." He hesitated. "They're also claiming you've been trespassing on HOA-owned land." I slowly turned toward Willow Creek, visible from my backyard. The land where my father had taught me to fish. The land my grandfather had protected for 70 years. According to the HOA, it no longer belonged to me. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. Someone had changed something far bigger than a fence. The deputies left without issuing a citation. One of them quietly suggested I avoid crossing the fence until the ownership dispute was clarified. It wasn't an order, just practical advice. Still, hearing those words while standing on land my family had cared for 3 generations felt like a punch to the gut. Rachel waited until their patrol car disappeared before speaking. "What are we going to do?" I looked toward the creek. Through the steel bars, I could see sunlight dancing across the water exactly as it always had. The creek hadn't changed. Only the people claiming to own it had. I'm going to find out how this happened. The next morning, I took a vacation day from work and drove to the Buncombe County Register of Deeds office. If Diane was right, the county records would prove it. If she wasn't, there had to be a trail showing where everything went wrong. The clerk at the front desk, a woman named Linda Foster, recognized my property address almost immediately. "You're here about Willow Creek, aren't you?" I blinked. "You've heard about it?" She gave me a cautious smile. "Let's just say you're not the first resident who's come asking questions." She led me to a public records terminal and helped me pull decades of plats, easement maps, and deed transfers. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The subdivision plans from the late 1990s showed the creek running along parcel 27, my family's parcel. Then something changed. A revised digital survey filed 5 years earlier suddenly shifted the boundary line. Not by much, just enough to place the creek inside land labeled as HOA common property. I frowned. "That's odd." Linda leaned closer. "What is?" "The original survey follows the natural watercourse. This one doesn't." As a civil engineer, I had spent years reviewing legal plats. Boundary revisions happened, but they left a paper trail. Surveyor certifications, engineering reports, county approvals. This file contained almost none of that. Only a scanned survey bearing an unfamiliar surveyor's seal. "I'd like a certified copy of everything connected to this revision." Linda nodded. "It may take a day or 2. As I gathered my papers, an older man who had been quietly examining maps at a nearby table walked over. I couldn't help overhearing. He extended a weathered hand. "Name's Walter Hayes, retired county surveyor." I shook it. "You worked here?" "For 38 years. He glanced at the digital map on my screen, then frowned deeply. "I remember Willow Creek." "You do?" "I surveyed that subdivision before the first house was built." He stared at the altered boundary for several long seconds. Finally, he looked me straight in the eye. "Son, I never drew that line." The words hit me harder than any threat Diane had made. Walter pointed at the surveyor's seal on the revised plat. "That isn't mine. And unless my memory has completely failed me..." He paused, his expression turning grave. "The surveyor whose name is on that document retired 2 years before this map was supposedly created." In that instant, what had seemed like an aggressive HOA project began to look like something far more dangerous. Someone hadn't just moved a fence. Someone may have fabricated county records to steal an entire creek. Walter didn't waste another second. "Come with me," he said, gathering his worn leather portfolio. "There's something I want to show you." We drove across town to his modest brick home, where one room had been converted into a personal archive. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. Shelves overflowed with rolled survey maps, engineering notebooks, and aerial photographs dating back decades. "My wife keeps telling me to throw this stuff away," Walter said with a faint smile. "Good thing I never listened." He unlocked a cabinet, labeled Cedar Ridge Development, and carefully pulled out a yellowed survey tube. "I always kept a copy of my final field plats," he explained. He spread the map across a large drafting table. There it was, the original 1998 subdivision survey. Every bearing, monument marker, and elevation note matched the county records I had reviewed, except for one critical detail. Willow Creek clearly remained attached to parcel 27, my parcel. Walter traced the property line with his finger. "See these iron pins?" he asked. "They establish the legal boundary. If they're still in the ground, the boundary hasn't moved." I felt a surge of hope. "So we can prove it." "Maybe." His expression quickly darkened, "unless someone removed them." The next morning, Walter, Rachel, and I walked the property carrying a metal detector and copies of the original survey. The first monument took nearly 20 minutes to locate. It was still there, buried just beneath the soil exactly where Walter's notes said it should be. "So the original line is intact," I said. Walter nodded. "One pin isn't enough. We need the rest." By late afternoon, we had located 3 more. Each one confirmed the same thing. The legal boundary had never changed. The HOA fence had been built several feet inside my property's historic boundary, cutting off direct access to the creek and enclosing land that legally wasn't theirs. It was the breakthrough we'd been praying for. Then Rachel's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen, and the color drained from her face. "Ethan." "What is it?" "It's Emma. Our 20-year-old daughter was home from college for the summer and had gone into town that morning." Rachel handed me the phone. Emma was crying. "Dad, someone broke into your workshop." My stomach tightened. "What?" "They smashed the windows. Your filing cabinets are everywhere, and all the property papers you kept there." She struggled to breathe. "They're gone." I raced home. The sheriff's deputies arrived minutes after I did. Nothing else had been stolen. Not the tools. Not the electronics. Not the expensive equipment. Only one thing was missing. Every original deed copy, survey, family correspondence, and property record my grandfather had preserved for nearly 70 years had disappeared. As the deputies photographed the damage, one of them quietly pulled me aside. "This doesn't look like a burglary." "No." He glanced toward the empty filing cabinets. "It looks like someone knew exactly what they came for." Standing in the middle of my shattered workshop, I realized the fight had entered a new phase. Whoever was behind this wasn't just protecting an illegal fence anymore. They were trying to erase the truth before it ever reached a courtroom. The break-in changed everything. Until then, I had believed this was a dispute over property lines. After standing in my ransacked workshop, staring at empty file drawers that had once held 3 generations of family records, I realized someone was willing to commit crimes to keep the truth buried. That afternoon, Walter insisted we stop reacting and start preparing. "If they're destroying evidence," he said, "it's because they know the evidence hurts them." Rachel agreed. "We need a lawyer." Walter smiled for the first time in days. "I know exactly who." The following morning, we met Sarah Mitchell, a property rights attorney whose office overlooked the Buncombe County Courthouse. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything: the fence, the altered surveys, the deputies at my door, and finally the burglary. When I finished, she folded her hands. "I have one question." "What is it?" "Did the HOA ever provide a title opinion or recorded deed proving they acquired the creek?" I shook my head. "They just kept saying the county records supported them." Sarah nodded slowly. "Good." I frowned. "Good?" "If they actually owned the property, that paperwork would have been the first thing they showed you." She immediately began filing requests for discovery, subpoenaing county planning records, surveyor licensing files, board meeting minutes, and every email connected to the Willow Creek Recreation Project. Within 2 weeks, documents began arriving. Most of them helped very little. Then one envelope changed everything. It contained internal HOA emails that had never been intended for public view. One message from Diane to the board caught Sarah's attention immediately. "Once the revised survey is recorded, resident objections won't matter. By the time anyone notices, the creek project will already be complete." Sarah looked up. "That's interesting." Another email followed. Greg Sanders had written, "Has legal confirmed we're covered if Brooks finds the original easement?" My heart skipped. "Original easement?" Sarah continued reading. The final reply came from Diane herself. "He won't. The county archive only contains the updated file." Walter leaned over Sarah's shoulder. "They were counting on the original records disappearing." Before I could process that, Sarah's assistant rushed into the conference room carrying another folder. "You need to see this." Inside was a forensic report comparing the digital county survey with archived backups recovered from the county's computer system. The metadata told an astonishing story. The revised survey hadn't been created by the retired surveyor whose seal appeared on it. It had been uploaded from a private computer registered to a consulting company hired by the HOA 3 weeks before the county officially received it. Someone outside the county had created the file first. Sarah slowly closed the folder. "They've spent 2 years pretending this was a simple boundary correction." I looked at the screen displaying the metadata. "What does this prove?" She met my eyes. "It proves the map didn't originate with the county." She paused just long enough for the weight of her next words to settle. "It originated with the people who stood to profit from changing it." For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't walking into court hoping to defend my property. I was walking in with evidence that could expose fraud, conspiracy, and the deliberate theft of land. And judging by the increasingly desperate messages coming from Diane's attorney requesting private settlement discussions, they knew it too. The Buncombe County Courthouse had never felt so quiet. Even before the judge entered, every seat in the gallery was filled. Neighbors who had once argued at HOA meetings now sat shoulder to shoulder. Local reporters lined the back wall with notebooks open, waiting. Diane Holloway sat across the aisle in a tailored navy suit, her expression carefully composed, but I noticed she hadn't looked at me once. Sarah leaned over. "They're nervous." "How can you tell?" "They've already tried to settle 3 times this week." The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone stood as Judge Harold Whitmore entered. "This court will hear Brooks versus Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association." The HOA's attorney opened first. He argued that the association had relied on official county records in good faith, invested substantial funds into improving the creek area, and acted solely for the benefit of residents. Then Sarah rose. "Your Honor, this case is not about landscaping or neighborhood improvements." She paused, letting the silence settle. "It is about whether private citizens can rewrite property boundaries, erase historical records, and profit from land they never legally owned." The first witness was Walter Hayes. Calm and precise, he explained how he had personally surveyed Cedar Ridge decades earlier. Using enlarged plats, he identified every original monument marker and testified that the legal boundary had never placed Willow Creek inside HOA property. The HOA's attorney tried to shake him. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it possible your memory has faded after all these years?" Walter smiled politely. "I don't rely on memory." He pointed to his signed field notebooks. "I rely on measurements." The courtroom murmured. Next came the county's digital records administrator. Sarah projected the metadata onto a large screen. "Who uploaded the revised survey?" "It did not originate on a county server." "And where did it originate?" The witness adjusted his glasses. "According to the forensic examination, a private consulting firm's computer." "Was that consulting firm under contract with Buncombe County?" "No." "Who hired them?" After a long pause, the witness answered, "The Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association." A wave of whispers swept through the gallery. The judge raised his hand for silence. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Sarah placed the original 1919 water rights document beside the altered digital survey. "Your Honor, these 2 documents cannot both be true." She called the county archivist, who confirmed that the century-old water rights record had been stored in a separate archive and had never been legally vacated or amended. The judge slowly compared both exhibits. Finally, he looked toward Diane. "Mrs. Holloway, would you please stand?" She rose reluctantly. The judge held up the altered survey. "Can you explain why your board repeatedly represented this document as establishing ownership of Willow Creek, despite the existence of recorded water rights stating otherwise?" For the first time since the trial began, Diane had no prepared answer. She looked toward her attorney. He remained seated. The silence stretched across the courtroom until it became almost unbearable. Then Diane quietly said 4 words that changed everything. "I never read them." The judge's expression hardened. He glanced toward Sarah. "Counselor," he reached for his notes, "I'm prepared to rule." The entire courtroom held its breath. No one moved. The courtroom was so still that I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Judge Whitmore placed both hands on the bench and looked first at Diane Holloway, then at the rest of the HOA board seated behind her. "This court has reviewed the testimony, the historical surveys, the forensic analysis, the county records, and the documentary evidence presented over the past 3 days. He paused. "The conclusion is unavoidable." Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on him. The Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association never acquired ownership of Willow Creek or the adjoining property contained within Parcel 27. A wave of relieved laughter and quiet cheers swept through the gallery before the bailiff restored order. The judge continued, "The revised survey submitted to county records cannot be relied upon." The evidence demonstrates that it originated outside county government, conflicted with controlling historical records, and was used to justify actions that had no legal basis. He signed the first order. Effective immediately, every fence, gate, access restriction, and fee associated with Willow Creek is declared void and shall be removed. Diane slowly lowered her head. But the judge wasn't finished. The court further orders restitution to every resident who paid access fees, together with statutory interest. Sarah squeezed my shoulder. I could barely process what I was hearing. Then came the words that truly stunned the room. This matter is referred to the Buncombe County District Attorney for investigation into potential civil and criminal violations, including fraudulent record submissions, conspiracy, and unlawful interference with recorded property rights. A reporter hurried out of the courtroom before the hearing had even ended. Within hours, local television stations were broadcasting the story. The headlines weren't about a neighborhood dispute anymore. They were about an HOA accused of attempting to seize a historic creek through altered records. Over the following months, the fallout was enormous. Diane resigned before the HOA held an emergency meeting. 3 other board members followed within a week. The consulting firm that had prepared the altered survey lost several municipal contracts while investigators reviewed its work. The county launched a full audit of property record procedures to ensure something like this could never happen again. As for the neighborhood, something unexpected happened. The argument stopped. Neighbors who had barely spoken during the conflict gathered together on a Saturday morning to help remove the black steel fence piece by piece. Some brought tools, others brought coffee and homemade cookies. Children who had spent months staring through the bars were the first to run down the restored path to the creek, laughing as they skipped stones across the water. I stood beside Rachel and Emma, watching the sunlight shimmer across Willow Creek exactly as it had when my grandfather first brought my father there. Rachel slipped her hand into mine. "You kept your promise?" I smiled. "What promise?" "You said you weren't just fighting for our land." She looked toward the families gathered along the water. "You were fighting for everyone's right to keep it." For the first time in nearly 2 years, Willow Creek no longer divided our community. It brought it back together. 6 months after the court's decision, life in Cedar Ridge looked remarkably different. The black steel fence was gone without leaving a trace. In its place, a simple wooden footpath led families back to Willow Creek, just as it had for generations. On warm evenings, I would sit on the same flat rock where my father once taught me to fish and watch children laughing along the shoreline. Their parents no longer worried about access fees, locked gates, or warning signs. The creek belonged exactly where it always had, in the lives of the people who respected it. Looking back, I realized the hardest part wasn't facing the HOA in court. It was refusing to give up when powerful people insisted I was wrong, even while I knew the truth was buried somewhere beneath paperwork, intimidation, and lies. Justice doesn't always arrive quickly, and standing your ground can be lonely, but facts have a way of surviving longer than deception. If this experience taught me anything, it's that property rights, community trust, and integrity are worth defending. Never assume that an official-looking document tells the whole story. Ask questions, keep records, and don't let fear convince you to surrender something that is rightfully yours. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and following this journey from beginning to end. I truly appreciate every one of you who watched, listened, and supported the story. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had an HOA, neighbor, or local authority overstep their legal boundaries? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments. I read them, and your story might help someone facing a similar situation. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next dramatic HOA case. Until next time, remember this: the truth may take the long road, but when it finally arrives, it has a way of changing everything.